Let's get going with the second talk of this session by Nicolas Boulanger on linearized 3D higher spin dynamics for unfolding.
Okay, thank you very much. And I will continue along the same lines as I did for the first talk, except that now I will consider the special case of 3 dimensions, which deserves separate treatment. So the main motivation for me is really the Gabadil-Gobakuma correspondence, and last year I've seen that Matthias has given very nice lectures. So I actually would like to use what he taught last time, and not, anyway, because I'm not an expert, not repeat the beginning, but just tell you that this is main motivation for this talk, is that HS high-spin CFT correspondence has been very quite also investigated in 3D bulk versus 2D CFT, and I would like to give you some tools to understand what kind of beast can appear in the ADS3 bulk. And in fact, there is the last version of the Gabadil-Gobakuma correspondence that Matthias told you last year, which is being investigated by those people, like Joris Rijmaker, who is doing quite interesting work at the moment. And the way the question I will show you are definitely useful for this problem, for what he's doing, just to understand the ADS372, the high-spin 372 correspondence in the last version of Matthias and the Gabadil-Gobakuma. Okay, so just a few words, that the bulk, the dynamics of the bulk, is believed to be a Prokrushkin-Vassiliev high-spin gravity theory coupled to matter fields. Another comment is that I'm not aware of any fully nonlinear high-spin extension of topologically massive gravity. So the latter topologically massive gravity has one bulk massive graviton, and it has interesting black-hole solutions. And it's interesting to look at the high-spin extension. So here, for this lecture, we'll talk about the free theory, but it's definitely interesting topic to try to understand nonlinear generalization of these models. Okay, so I will here focus on bosonic fields, because fermionic fields is not a difference, and you will find it in the paper. Actually, yes, this is based on several papers, but mainly 2 papers, one with Mitya Ponomarev, Ergin, Sesgin, and Persondel there. And then the last part of the talk, I will extract some things we did with Thomas Basile and Roberto Bonetti while in Mons. So that's the first part. Second part, and I want to say that it's very interesting also the 2+1 dimensional case for fractional spin fields. And again, I cannot have time to describe that, but that's an extra motivation for me. Although I don't know if in context of ADS-CFT, those fractional spin fields have played a role so far. Some experts can tell me later if this happens. But as a system in the bulk, it exists. I mean, you have fractional spin fields, and that's quite interesting. In fact, with Per Sandel and Maurizio Valenzuela, we have proposed a fully nonlinear system, which is, of course, based on Chern-Simons theory, that unifies 3D higher spin gravity with internal U-engaged fields, and matter being represented by fractional spin fields. So spin is no longer integer or half integer, but can be any actually real number. So terminology is fractional spin, but it can be any real number. And
but are we here talking of operators of any spin, or are we talking about...
Here at the classical level, so that's why I like to prefer the terminology fractional spin. I'm not using the terminology anion, but that's just a sentence I wanted to say, is that if you second quantize the model, then that gives you anion. And I can give you references where people have done second quantized theory of fractional spin fields, which then are called anions. And then you have the spin statistic theorem. It's quite a subtle issue. And, there's a group at ETH Zurich who is working on that. Fröhlich, Jürgen Fröhlich, mostly. Okay. Good. So, and in this lecture, I will insert this tool that is called unfolding, but that's essentially the Cartan way of describing a theory of field equations. I mean, any field equation, any PDE can be reformulated in a way which looks like an exterior differential system, or FAB system, and unfolding is really based on that tool, which is also called prolongation in mathematics, is that For example, for exchange equation, you add the spin connection to the set of fields so that the field equation in the end look like a first-order differential system. That's a tool you can always do. In fact, it goes probably back to Ostrokowski in the 19th century. So there's this ingredient, which is prolongation, let's say in math, and then what Michel Vassiliev added, which is very important, is that to recognize that the propagating degrees of freedom are fully incorporated into an infinite tower of zero forms. So you have some p forms, let's say some one forms, like in the case of gravity, in the Cartan-Weil formulation. And you have some potential gate fields. And then the degrees of freedom themselves, they are represented in a set of zero forms, in which you have the Weil tensor viewed as a zero form and all its covariant derivatives, which are non-zero on shell. Okay. So Cartan formulation of dynamical system with local degrees of freedom in infinite towers of zero forms. The Lorentz tensors, these zero forms, they are Lorentz tensors, and this tower carry the unitary irreducible representation of the background space-time isometry algebra. And that makes the identification of the local degrees of freedom systematic. And I want to explain this systematics in the simplest example, which is 2+1 bulk, where actually most of the time the degrees of freedom are really at the boundary, but I will explain generalization of topologically massive gravity, where it does propagate in the bulk to higher speed. So ADS3, the propagating modes are characterized by the labels. Now we use the fact that SO2, 2 is isometric, isomorphic to SO2. Two copies of SO1, 2, there's SO1, 2 plus and SO1, 2 minus. My conventions for the signature is always that you have 1 minus 2 pluses for each of the two SO1, 2 algebras. And so equivalently, you can describe the modes. I mean, it's again good theory and that David recalled just before. Or equivalently, either by the eigenvalues of the Casimir of both SO1, 2 groups, or equivalently by eigenvalues of the mass square operator and by the data of the datum of an irreducible representation of the Lorentz group. So there will be several SO1, 2 into this talk. I will try to make it in such a way that you cannot confuse. So with plus and minus, I will show what it corresponds. And when there is no label, or sometimes when I will put a little LO, it's for the Lorentz subalgebra of the SO2, 2 isometry algebra for ADS3. Conventions are exactly the same as previous lecture. Is that the SO2, 2 indices run from 0, 0, 0 prime, 0, 1, 2. Maybe a stick could help, nevertheless, although there is no pointer. We'll just hide it because it's not there. No, it's not the stick. It will not do. Okay, well, I can always try that. Yeah. It's a good approximation to the stick. That's good enough for me. So I recall that the translation like, if you want, in ADS, are identified with this set of generators, and I like to rescale them so that they have a dimension of mass. And then you have the algebra, where you see that they don't commute, indeed, and they produce lambda squared, which is related to minus cosmological constant, because here I'm in ADS signature. You have the Lorentz signature, with, as I said, the mostly plus signature, and that's the Lorentz covariant differential operator, where you have spin connection and the Lorentz generators in the representation that you wish to consider. So now, for the two SO1, 2 algebras, the plus and the minus, the generators are obtained from the generators of SO2, 2 in this way, by that linear combination, where its epsilon can be plus or minus 1. And since I had rescaled my PA by mass, I had divided by lambda for dimensional reason. Then, as usual in 3D, one dualizes the generators of the Lorentz subalgebra to have these vector-valued generators. I use also this convention for the totally antisymmetric symbol. And then the Casimir of the two SO1, 2 algebras are just like that. The Casimir generator, quadratic Casimir. So that the mass square for a wave equation in ADS3, so the mass square operator, which is defined by the difference there can be computed also in terms of the Casimir there. This I will show you maybe on the slide. Okay, again to recall the notation of my previous lecture, we have the raising and lowering operator, so analogous to the P and K, but here I'm in the bulk. I'm not using the notation for the CFT, for the boundary CFT. Energy operator or dilation operator is there, and it's given in our conventions here by the difference of the time-like component of the generators for the two SO12 algebras. It's a difference. And instead, the spin generator, which is the rotation in the XY plane, so you have special plane in 2+1 dimension with time going like that. In the plane, the rotation around the origin is generated by this operator that we call the spin, and it's minus the sum of the time components of the two SO12 algebras. Good, and then we have they are raising and lowering precisely for this reason, and then I recall this commutation relation between raising and lowering operators. Okay, so now the point I want to stress is that in any local field theory, the local degrees of freedom are captured by a set of zero forms. And here we have Lorentz tensors in 2+1 dimensions. So since I consider only bosonic fields, integer spin, we have Lorentz tensors which can only be totally symmetric and traceless tensors. So the notation here, the convention, when I write A3 or something like that, with 3 between brackets, just means that there are 3 indices and that are totally symmetric. So 5, 3 just stands for 5, A1, A2, A3. And similarly for phi an, okay, because it takes less time to write than writing from A1 to an. And so these degrees of freedom, so these fields, these Lorentz tensors, have to obey this equation. So this I will maybe explain a little bit more. I have to give also the analogy, what you have already seen maybe in pure gravity with the Petrov expansion of a metric. So you know that a metric you can expand, you can use some Riemann normal coordinate, it's around a geodesic, and you know that, or maybe you don't know, but it turns out that the metric can be expanded in these normal coordinates, and in the expansion in the kind of Taylor series, in these Riemann normal coordinates, what you see appearing is actually on shell the Weil tensor. If you don't have any matter fields, we have Einstein theory, let's say in vacuum. So the expansion is done in terms of the Weil tensor and all its covariant derivatives. So these are really the degrees of freedom for the graviton. And as I explained in the first lecture, so the field equation here, I take flat space to fix the idea, is that degrees of freedom are captured by a zero trace of a curvature equation. For spin 2, this is something you know very well. For linearized spin 2 theory in flat space, the field equation is just that the linearized Ricci tensor is 0 on shell, and that's obviously the trace of the linearized Riemann tensor that I denote by K. In the generic case, the rank, the curvature tensor for a spin S field in flat space, as I explained. So you have your potential gauge field, which is a spin S, totally symmetric, let's say spin S field in the simplest case, and then you add a curl, you have a derivative, you act with as many derivatives as the spin of the field is, and you anti-symmetrize in that way. So that is the curvature for the spin S field. Then asking that the trace of this quantity is 0, as I explained, gives you the proper degrees of freedom for a Franz-Dahl field, let's say in flat space. Although it doesn't look like that because it's a PDE of order S in the field, and for spin greater than 2, you have more than 2 derivatives, but there is a partial gauge fixing that brings you to this wave equation of degree 2, of order 2. So it's important that really the degrees of freedom are captured by gauge invariant quantities, and the first gauge invariant quantity that you meet is the curvature. So you have to go up to that, you have to go to that order. And then you know that on shell, the trace of this curvature is 0. So if you want to look at the gauge invariant degrees of freedom, which on shell are non-zero, you are bound to take only the Weil tensors, which is defined to be the traceless part of the curvature. So maybe I can write, it's going down. Let's say that it's the curvature schematically minus its trace. And maybe also, just to recall you, that it is the Weil tensor in the case of spin 2, which transforms in 4 dimensions, which transforms in the representation of the Lorentz, the complexified Lorentz algebra, which is itself to see as homomorphic to a sum of 2, let's say SU2 plus the conjugate SU2. So in terms of the levels of each of SU2, the graviton has LCT plus 2 and minus 2. And in terms of field description, these are carried, these degrees of freedom are carried by the Weil tensor. Is it okay? But it's completely the same for any spin. So it's only the traceless part of the curvatures that describe, which are gauge invariant and are on-shell non-zero, and then all their covariant derivatives. So all these degrees of freedom are captured by these zero forms. And so now the equation that you may want to ask is, how does all these components related? So we like to recover the good old field equations, like such a field equation. And here we want to be as general as possible. So we would write an equation relating the covariant derivative of one of these fields in this set of, in this tower, zero form, to the next. So, okay, you can always rescale, and you can put coordinate, index B there to the Lorentz covariant derivative, and you can always define a new tensor, which is the way actually you build this tower. Let's say you start from a minimal rank integer n, that of course that will turn out to be the spin of the fields that you will be describing. Then you continue. What else can you have? Well, you can have a term, because you are in ADS, or anyway you can always write that. Is there an eraser here around?
Yeah, it's Nicholas, it's on the board.
Yeah. So what kind of structure do you have? So you have Lorentz tensors, so all you have at your disposal are Lorentz invariant tensors. So here you have the metric, the quadratic form for the Lorentz algebra. And here you can talk to something which is at level n-1. And this symbol, this curly bracket, just means that you first symmetrize totally, but the symmetrization usually we do by using the same Latin letter. So whenever you have something like phi A and let's say psi A, what we mean by that is that it's 1/2 phi A1 psi A2 plus phi A2 psi A1. So it means symmetrization with a strength 1. And then this curly bracket means that you also remove the trace after that. Because they are Lorentz tensors, so you want to preserve the symmetry of the left-hand side. So you declare those to be also Lorentz tensors. Then you have this additional term that you can add. And then, okay, that's the ansatz that you may wish to write for a field. So what you do now is that you want all these zero forms to give you a representation, and unitarity will have to be described at some point. But at first, you want to have an irreducible representation of your isometric algebra. In this case, it is SO2, 2. And the splitting of generators here that I consider, because I start from Lorentz tensor, is that I consider the Lorentz subalgebra here. So all these guys are, by assumption, Lorentz tensors. So I know how the Lorentz generators M, B, C, they act on all these tensors. So on that tensor I start with, and the next one in the list, because it's just totally symmetric, just rotates the indices the usual way. So let me leave it. N, I, eta, A, C. Maybe I will put a 2 in my conventions. 5, B, anti-symmetric, anti-symmetrized. And then A and minus 1. And the n there is because I have this convention of strength 1 symmetrization, so that you have seen this n minus 1 plus 1 indices, which have the same letter A. It means that I symmetrize all of them with strength 1, and that's why the action of the Lorentz generator produces n such terms. So we know how the Lorentz algebra acts already on all these tensors. So now we would like to know how the translation or convection-like generators of ADS, they act on them, because then we know how the full isometry algebra acts on these tensors, and then we have a representation. So, as usual here, these generators, we take them to be up to lambda given by the Lorentz covariant derivative, because you know that this is a representation of the ADS algebra. And then we just act on this equation with the covariant derivative. So you act with the nabla. So when you act there, you use again the same type of equation, which is, you know, this coefficient will have to be determined. My point is that they will be completely fixed by the requirement of the fact that they should carry a representation of the ADS algebra. So nabla C on this, B, A, N. This again will open, so there will be extra terms. But then I can use the same type of equation, which will be given by a new tensor, which has one extra index. Is it okay? N. Then plus lambda n plus 1. Again, the same type of structure. Now it's a C. Here I have to centralize that in N. That's it for this equation. You see, I just take the same pattern as below, but now the rank has changed. There's one extra index, which is B. And then, so I took care of that, and then there is plus lambda n. Of course, it commutes with, this is an invariant tensor, B, and then A, and then nabla C acting on that field. Again, I use the same equation. Maybe I should open parentheses, so there will be a phi C A n minus 1. And then plus lambda n minus 1 p's that I will not completely write, not only because the backbone is at the end, but because it gives 0 identically, since it will carry also an index A, but because I have to take the symmetric and traceless projection of that, the projection, the traceless projection of something which is of the form eta B A. After I stop with the backbone, it's not possible to read much. But if you take the traceless projection of such a quantity, it's identically 0. So this term, the term here, drops out. Good. But now, at this stage, you take the commutator, you antisymmetrize over the indices C and B. You use the fact that you are in ADS, ADS3, and that the commutator of two covariant derivatives produces up to a lambda squared the same field with some eta, C and D, etc. I basically wrote it here, just this multiplied by lambda squared. So here the point is that on the left-hand side, you have the tensor, put schematically, with of rank n that appears. On the right-hand side, you have the tensor of rank n plus 2. Then you have the tensor of rank n that appears again, and again the tensor of rank n. So both sides have to agree. So that gives you a relation between the lambda n plus 1 and the lambda n coefficient. So lambda n plus 1 will be related to lambda n. And you have some initial condition that if you declare n, let's take n to be s, say 2 for example, to be the minimum value, then obviously lambda 2 will be 0 because you don't have a tensor which has rank lower than that just by assumption. So you have an initial condition, you have a recursion relation, so you can fix completely this constant. And the result, again, is that now acting with the full Lorentz algebra of these tensors, you have an infinite set of tensors, it goes up and up, like that, provides you with a representation of the anti-de Sitter algebra. Afterwards, from this equation, instead of taking the commutator, you can take the trace and have a mass-like, a D'Alembert-like equation. So by reading off the value of the mass-like terms, by group theory, you know what is the representation, in which set of series it falls. Okay, so that's, I wanted to explain the basic strategy to unfold an equation, but because this has a name, it means unfolding a field equation. So let's say that you want to unfold a free scalar field in ADS, then you would take n is 0 to begin with, you follow this procedure, you fix the value of lambda, that gives you an infinite tower of totally symmetric and traceless tensors, but you know that it encodes the information about a massless field or massive scalar field in a scalar field, in the sense that out of this infinite set of equations that you derive, so all these equations, now we have n, okay, now it's finished, n goes up to infinity, but you can eliminate, obviously you can eliminate this tensor in terms of the covariant derivative of that one, while minus this, taking the projection, the appropriate projection, so you can express all the higher tensors in terms of the first ones, and go back to the usual Klein-Gordon equation. So that looks completely wrong way to do field theory, but it turns out that it describes quite well, it really shows you what are the physical degrees of freedom. If you're in terms of, I go back to this Petrov expansion of a metric, it shows you really where the degrees of freedom sit in the Lorentz covariant way. So that's the point, that here we insist on manifest Lorentz covariance everywhere. So that's a way of doing the Bachmann-Wigner program, but where the degrees of freedom, instead of transforming manifestly under the compact subalgebra, the maximally compact subalgebra, where you recognize the delta for the SO2, you recognize the spin, but of SOD, of the SO2 plus SOD maximal compact subalgebra. Here instead you want to see manifestly the action of the SO1, D Lorentz subalgebra. And so that's the way it goes. That's the usual problem. No, it should not be the same.
No, it's
because
fine.
It's a different connection. It's because I spent too much time. What do I have to do next?
Oh no, that's good. I'll just plug it in. It should be fine.
Ah, that's okay. Battery. Okay, so once you have done all this stuff, it turns out two different, in fact I cheated a little bit. There's an extra structure that you can add in 3 dimensions, is that you can use, there is another invariant tensor for SO1, 2, which is the epsilon symbol. So actually there is a new one, there's an extra piece there, with an epsilon, so it goes, C, and then A, and then another A, n-1, let's see how I should manage that, -1, and contract C is the C here, and you again take this projection, symmetric and traceless. It turns out that for the scalar field, so if you declare that the first tensor in your tower is a scalar, as n is 0, you find out that there exists again a relation between the values un, but that this is 0, they are all 0. And that gives you this first set of equations in the case of a scalar field. There. So the lambda n here has been, you can find it, I mean, it's a direct straightforward computation to do, and I explain how to make it. You find what it is. But then if you start from a tensor which has rank at least 1 or 2, then you find that these mu n coefficients are non-zero, and actually they are given in terms of one mass parameter mu. And then you have lambda n coefficients, which now take that expression. And that corresponds to a generic massive spin S field in ADS. As I explained, if you go back to the first one in the list, you look at the second equation there, with n, in fact n plus 1 and n, and you take a trace to make appear a D'Alembertian. You can read off what is the value for the mass squared operator, and you know from group theory that it is generically a massive field. But the mass parameter, of course, will depend on mu, so that's interesting. On mu, this parameter there,
yeah, okay.
Which encodes a kind of, obviously, a parity breaking effect. So for mu is 0, what we got there are actually the linearized Prokrushkin-Vassiliev equation at a critical point. So if you remember the lectures of Matthias, in this HS3 CFT2 business, you have a HS lambda algebra. So the higher spin algebra in 3 dimensions, in fact, is a family of higher spin algebra, a continuous family, where you have a parameter, I call it here nu. In the case, this new parameter here in my conventions is an odd integer, negative odd integer. There is a mechanism, interesting mechanism that appears, and that I will describe now, but that was spotted by Prokrushkin-Vassiliev at that time. Okay. Yes, indeed. So the lambda, the more familiar lambda parameter that Matthias would use, is related to the new Prokrushkin-Vassiliev by this relation. So
this gets back fixed spin.
Yes.
I don't think Matthias last year told us about. Actually, it was 2 years ago. No?
2 years ago. Okay.
Yeah, but anyway, I don't think he had a fixed spin. He had all spins, I think.
Yeah, that's right, because Prokrushkin-Vassiliev is an interacting theory,
right.
So they are all related, that's right. But nevertheless, so there is an HS lambda, indeed, and that's a high spin algebra in the sense that you have not only one spin, but an infinite tower of higher spin. Okay. But nevertheless, I mean, the lambda of discuss is this lambda. So you can take the Prokrushkin-Vassiliev equation, you can linearize them. Okay, go back here. So if you linearize the Prokrushkin-Vassiliev equation, you will see this parameter lambda hanging around, and it is identified there. I mean, if you take mu0 in those equations, that will correspond to the Prokrushkin-Vassiliev equation at critical point mu minus 2s plus 1 statement. You have an infinite set of linearized equations,
right.
One for each spin.
That's right.
So here spin here is also arbitrary. Spin is a number. Here in this case is strictly greater than 0. For spin 0, you have this set of equations.
See, his lambda was related to this scaling of k, which
yes.
is in the minimal CFT of k and divided by m.
Yes.
That is lambda, so somehow I don't recall.
Exactly. Yeah, sorry, maybe still I should have at least one slide just to recall the very basic ideas.
I don't recall that it was related to spin. That's why I'm reacting to that. Maybe
no, indeed. So that's a so this point, the critical point, is quite interesting because it relates definitely new to the spin. But maybe something I could tell that may help you to understand is that people also study SLN, Chern-Simons theory.
Oh, that's right.
Chern-Simons theory, that is not actually a Prokrushkin-Vassiliev-like equation because you have a finite number of spin, you have a finite tower of spin, up to spin n. Okay, so for example, people obviously worked a lot on SL3 Chern-Simons as a high spin theory in 3 dimensions because it contains only spin 2 and spin 3. But actually that comes from the critical limit of Prokrushkin-Vassiliev equation, where you actually have an ideal that appears, where you have spin n plus 1, just write schematically, n plus 2, right, up to infinity. So at the critical value nu that I described, the higher spin algebra HS lambda decomposes in this way, where you see a SL n, obviously the n is related to the lambda, I remember the precise formula, but there is also this idea that usually people don't consider, just they factor it out. But it is there. So it is infinite. You have infinitely many spins, but for the critical value, you can forget about that and work only quotients and work only in this finite dimensional subalgebra and compute black hole solutions for SL3, Chern-Simons theory, and all that.
Okay.
But obviously, for an interacting theory, it should be important to keep track of all these guys. So, okay, so that's what I was describing. Good, so now for strictly positive spin, you can see from the value of this parameter lambda n that when this mass parameter takes these values, plus or minus lambda s prime, you have that the coefficient lambda s prime goes to 0. So remember that the coefficient lambda, it calls, when you act with the covariant derivative on the field, it brings back a field which was before in the tower at level, let's say n-1, at spin n-1. So if this coefficient stops at some value of the spin, it means that you can forget about the rest and continue. So you have a structure of indecomposable structure, where you have an ideal that starts at this value s prime up to infinity, really as in fact as I explained there, and then you have a finite dimensional set of fields there, so that this set of fields that forms by construction a representation of the SO2,2 algebra decomposes in that way. So I give an example. If you take s prime to be s plus 1, then in this tower of equation, it's really impossible, it's too small, but okay, you have the first one, which is phi, nabla acting on phi s, it brings the phi s plus 1, and then plus mu of phi at previous level. Then you look at it's 0, the lambda parameter is 0 because that's the initial condition. You declare that you start at some value s, then you go at nabla acting on phi s plus 1, and then because of this mechanism, the lambda that would have brought back the field at the previous spin is 0, and then you continue, and you never talk about the first field, which is phi of rank s. So you can start, actually you can forget about this first equation, and consider only the tower field starting at spin s plus 1, instead of starting at spin s. It's really like here, where you can effectively start, you can only consider these fields and forget about that, or the other way around. In fact, the decomposable structure can be flipped around, as I will explain now. Or maybe just after. Okay. So one slide after, there is a way to flip the decomposable structure in the other way. Suppose you want to only work with an infinite set of fields instead of a finite set of fields. There is a way to change the parameterization of the fields to actually have a theory where the structure is the other way around. So that you want still to work with an infinite set of fields because you like that pattern. So now, if you compute the mass operator, what you find is this value, where this is the Laplace-Beltrami operator, wave operator in ADS3. For the scalar field, so each time spin 0 and spin greater than 0 have to be discussed separately. For the spin 0 field, you have this value, and you see that this value m is related to the quadratic Casimir in this way. So it's really the mass of the scalar field in ADS. So if you compute the quadratic Casimir of SO2,2 in the representation for the spin s, you find that value. So now you can use the group theory and see, okay, depending on the value of nu, what do I describe? So the little operation that I was referring to, you start from the first of the field equations. You can either act with, take a trace over these two indices, and then what you find is that the divergence of this field is 0, so the field is divergence-less unshare. Or you can also construct this with an epsilon symbol in an appropriate way, and end up with this type of equation here, which is a first-order differential equation for this field. You see that talks to itself. It has, this is the field at rank S that brings back the tensor field at rank S. And it turns out that on top of that, you can, this field by definition, they are traceless, and you start with a set of Lorentz tensor. And for spin 2, this equation is the equation for linearized topologically massive quantity. A small technical comment is due to the fact that the field is divergence-less. Actually, there is no need to symmetrize the index nu with all the indices there, because if you try to anti-symmetrize this index nu with one of the others, you would actually obtain the divergence of this field, but this is 0. But that's just a technical comment.
So the limit,
yes.
The limit for Einstein gravity would be the normal is mu to 0, right?
Okay, so for
to get rid of the topologically massive.
Okay, so for TMG, the nonlinear field equation looks like that. Mu is 0, so it's mu going to infinity. That would be the limit for Einstein. You see, so this is the dual of the Cotton tensor. And this guy is one covariant derivative of the Schouten tensor, so which has as many derivatives as the Einstein. So you need to divide by a mass parameter for the dimensions. And this is the mu. Okay, so as I said, in fact, the system of equations there, you notice that implicitly I've taken the coefficient 1 there, because I can anyway absorb it in the new field that enters at each step. But I could have chosen another parameterization, and if you did that, in fact, the general parameterization would bring these two coefficients alpha and beta, and there are two possible choices. Alpha and beta can be 0 and 1. So actually, at the critical value, mu is this lambda SS prime, where you have an indecomposable structure. When beta is 0, you have an ideal where the covariant derivative closes on the set of fields, on an infinite set of fields, starting from S prime up to infinity, and that's the structure that I'm mostly interested in, because if you have a finite number of zero forms that describe your degrees of freedom, actually it's a topological theory. A truly local theory must have an infinite set of zero forms in the spectrum, because they are all, if you want, the Taylor coefficient in the expansion of a field around a point. So, I mean, if this field propagates, you must be able to describe it in a neighborhood of a point by expanding it in derivatives. Again, like this Petrov decomposition of a metric, expansion of a metric in Riemann normal coordinates. So since we are interested in local degrees of freedom, we like an infinite set of zero forms for propagating degrees of freedom. But if beta is 1, then the ideal that is closed under the covariant derivative is the finite set of fields. But this finite set of fields, if you just describe, forget about the rest because it can be decoupled, it cannot describe local degrees of freedom. It can only describe topological field in theory. Good, now let's discuss class spectrum and unitarity. And how much time do I have?
About 20 minutes.
Okay. Good. So we would like to look at lowest energy unitary irreducible representation of SO2, as was discussed, I discussed in the first lecture. Yeah, we have the two labels, the critical energy and the spin. So this epsilon, this E naught is the energy of the lowest energy state. S0 corresponds to the SO2 spin of the lowest energy state. In case of a scalar field, the values are given there, where I exhibited the value of the quadratic Casimir of SO2, 2. So epsilon 0 is written in terms of the value of the quadratic Casimir. Anyway, spin is 0 for a scalar field. Good. So unitarity. So you have unitarity for the plus sign, obviously, there for all the values of the mass squared which is greater or equal to -1. I recall that in ADS you can have negative squared mass. Unitarity is okay. That's Friedmann, Breitner-Friedmann bound. And you have unitarity also with the minus sign there, provided that the mass squared is in this interval. Okay. So that was the picture that I took from the previous lecture. Is that, and here I take arbitrary dimension. So now you would take small d is 2 for 3 dimensions. So that would be -1 there. So in terms of the mass square operator or eigenvalue, in ADS, you have that below this value, it's non-unitary, then starting at this value, it is unitary. And notice that here, a comment is that if you do an analytical continuation to de Sitter, as I explained, it changes totally. If you do naively an analytical continuation, you would lose the complementary series. So I mean, if you know what you do, and David knows definitely what he's doing, you can do analytical continuation and you control, but it's very dangerous to do analytical continuations for representation theory of non-compact Lie algebras. You may miss a lot of, you may lose the discrete series, the exceptional series in arbitrary dimension. Okay, so I recall the value that also David recalled to you of the value of the quadratic Casimir in this space with the lowest energy state. So from the equation that we derived, there you remember that we had this equation which for spin 2 was topologically massive gravity. We can identify the value of these two parameters, epsilon 0 and S0. And we see that now the critical energy is described by this parameter mu. Okay. Well, in fact, there are two LCTs, so you can have mu both positive So that's the case for positive nu, but for negative nu, that's the translation, the relation between E naught and mu. So unitarity requires that mu should be greater or equal to S times S minus 1. So the field that saturates the unitarity bound is the singleton, and is the one, so in 3 dimensions. So now I took the general formula for the previous lecture, and I take small d is 2. Here, unitarity is such that this is the field, the module, that saturates unitarity, and it corresponds to the singleton for ADS3. So it's a field that lives in the 2-dimensional compactified conformal infinity. Or you can have helicity plus S or minus S. And then I recalled what was the case for arbitrary dimension D in the previous slides. Okay. So in terms of nu, I repeat that unitarity requires this mass parameter to satisfy this bound.
So when you talk about unitarity, I guess you mean the sense of representation theory, but I mean these theories with any mu, right? I mean they are chiral theories. They're not somehow.
Okay.
Some of the statements that at least the dual theories are not unitary for any mu.
So here I really don't talk about the dual theory at all. I'm really looking at the bulk theory in ADS3, and I want that the degrees of freedom represent the ISO2,2 unitarily. So you want to have a Hilbert space where all the states have positive norms. And also, I also demand that there should be a lowest energy state, because there exists, again, some weird beast that exists where you can have a unitarizable module of SO2,2 without any lowest energy or highest energy state. This exists. I don't know what would be the description in terms of fields, but that's it. So here, for physical reason, if you are interested in modules which have lowest energy states, then you know what means unitarity, because you have this Fermat module, you build all the states based on the lowest weight state by the action of P, as David also told. And you want that all the states in this module should have positive norm if the starting field, the vacuum, has positive norm. And that fixes some constraint on the possible value for E naught.
Okay, so the fact that they're chiral is not relevant for this discussion.
For unitarity,
yeah.
No, I mean, really, unitarity gives you simply I can go back to the previous slide. In the case of the scalar field, unitarity is very simple. It just tells you that the square mass, eigenvalue, should be within this range.
So Nicholas, you want non-negative norm, is that right? So you allow 0 norm, or you?
No, okay, so we want an irreducible module. So once we have a 0 norm, it's a null state, and then we factor out because we want irreducibility. So in the end, it will all be strictly positive norm states in the module. Good. So for mu is 0, unitarity requires that what you have, that the spin should be plus or minus 1. So now if you go back to the labels of the SO12 left, say, and SO12 right algebras, to take more the language of CFT, the values of E naught and S translates into possible values for the spin of each of the 2 SO1,2 algebras. That is just given there. So it appears that the lowest energy representation of SO2,2 of the ADS3 algebra, actually in terms of the SO12 left and SO13 right, corresponds to the tensor product of the lowest weight representation of SO12 with the highest weight representation of SO1,2, but the other one. That's the plus, that's the minus. Okay. So again, the critical points are interesting. I recalled the constraint for unitarity, and I describe what a special case that happens. For example, again, take S prime, which is S plus 1, so that you are in the situation of having a critical point. So what you see is that for the SO12 minus algebra, there appears a finite dimensional module here with spin minus S up to spin plus S, and here it's a discrete series, actually, in terms of group theory of SO1,2 or SL2R, you have the discrete series here, which is given by your highest weight state here, and then you build all the states by acting with the lowering operator. In terms of the SO12 plus subalgebra, you have here you see that there is an ideal which is just a single state that appears, and then all the rest there is the discrete series for a lowest weight state of the Lorentz algebra, of the SO12 plus subalgebra.
About 10 minutes.
10 minutes, okay, good. And, okay, so obviously, so the structure of the theory that you have, if you take S prime is S plus 1, it turns out to be a theory which has critical energy S plus 2, which is the energy of the lowest of the energy state, spin S, and that decomposes into this structure for the two infinite dimensional modules which are there. So really, these are all applications of formulas that I gave in this special case of 3 dimensions. So now the singleton that saturates the unitarity bound. So they are called spin S singletons. In general, here you don't necessarily need to fix S to be 0. So the critical mass is given like that. And then you have this field equation for the critical mass corresponding to the singleton, so S minus 3. Actually, if you take the Franz-Dahl equation in ADS3, actually Franz-Dahl wrote it in 4 dimensions, but its Lagrangian is valid for arbitrary dimensions. And you take 3D, you see that the critical mass is precisely that. So this is indeed a massless field in ADS3, and correspondingly to what we know about singletons, it doesn't propagate local degrees of freedom. It is really actually confined to the boundary. In a way to make precise, David would be right in saying that I have to describe in which way it goes to infinity. There are 2 values for delta. I take the one that goes faster, and there are 2 branches I caution by the ideal, and so that one branch of that is really the singleton. So just to conclude at this stage, these modules where critical energy is 1 plus mu over S, this module carry the degrees of freedom of a spin S generalization of topologically massive gravity, but at generic value of the mass mu, this new parameter. As I said, I don't know any non-consistent, nonlinear generalization of the equation for spin S. At the linearized level, this is understood and classified there, but it would be also good to have a theory for these fields being intact. Okay, so there's some game that we can do. Is that the system studied so far is actually not the most general. You can have that this parameter actually could be matrices. So you can start, instead of 1 tower of field, you can add some Chan pattern indices if you want. Some I, etc., and I here. So suppose you take delta ij, then you would have something like this. And similarly with this parameter mu. So you actually have matrices. And again, the Cartan integrability. So Cartan integrability just means that this exercise that I did on the blackboard, that you act on the first equation with another, nabla, you take the commutator, you ask from the ADS algebra, you ask that the equation be consistent, that the coefficient of the field on both sides should be the same, and that is what is meant by Cartan integrability, because it's also related to the fact that you impose that differential operator D, and the exterior differential D should indeed be 0. This is in the end related to that. So Cartan integrability, this is really the same concept. It requires that those 2 matrices should commute for all value of n. Again, spin 0 and strictly positive spin have to be discussed separately. So that's what we find for these matrices, completely fixed. Now you can compute again the mass squared operator. It's not necessarily diagonal. So you find wave equations which mix the various towers of 0 forms. So you have several sets of infinitely many 0 forms, and they are mixed by this equation. You have an equation of a first order also, like that generalizes also the TMG. And in fact, if you take the most simple case where the mu matrix is off diagonal like that, so you only take 2 towers of 0 forms with this initial matrix mu, you see that all the mu n matrices, they are all fixed in terms of only one matrix. So in the end, that is really what parameterizes the possible set of field equations that you have. Once you give an initial matrix mu, then you look what you have. So in the end, there are several possibilities. If you take a diagonalizable matrix like this one here, but that I put in off-diagonal form, then what you get is the linearized for spin 2 is the linearized version of new massive gravity. If you know what is new massive gravity, if you don't know, it's a theory where you have, it's kind of improvement, or not improvement, but the extension of topologically massive gravity, where instead of having only one LCT state, spin plus LCT plus 2, let's say, propagating, you have both LCTs plus 2 and minus 2. Okay, so here that for spin 2 we get this generalization, but this is for arbitrary spin. So here that gives an example for spin S, which is arbitrary, take 26, which is a generalization of linearized new massive gravity, but for spin 26 in ATS3. So the equation factorizes there in terms of these two first order differential operators. These here are defined like that in the standard way. But you have operators totally symmetric, tracers, and divergence free. I mean, this is not explained. So the wave equation that we had here has solutions that are linear combinations of these phi plus and minus, each of which are solution of this equation, where phi plus and minus are given by the lowest state in each of the two towers. You take the minimal spin representative of each tower, and that defines this field. So just to say that you have many fields, many things that you find, now you can generalize, obviously. You can take a matrix which instead of being 2 times 2 is n times n, with different values of the eigenvalues instead of the same. So you have all possibilities that arises there, that give you field equation that factorizes in this way. Okay, the Kn equals 2 was just previous slides. But finally, another possibility is that you take a Jordan block for this matrix. So you have essentially one eigenvalue there, and that gives you field equation. Again, when you eliminate, so from one tower you can eliminate the fields in terms of the field of the previous tower, so that you have in the end one equation, but of higher order here, of order n, in terms of one single field, and that's the highest spin generalization of 3D critical massive gravity. Again, if you know what is massive critical gravity, it's good. Otherwise, well, it's really defined by this. Yes?
So in this case, do we lose unitarity?
Well, again, good question, because I don't remember what was the... I have to give you the value of the critical of the squared mass. So this field here, I think I have not written it there, but it obeys an equation, blah, blah, blah. So you see, it has this critical mass, and then in terms of the bound that gave you, I recall previously, you should be able to say if it is above or below that. And I forgot what it is. But again, I don't want to say something which is wrong. But you know what is the module that it carries in terms of critical mass squared and spin. So from that you know whether it's unitary or not. Most probably it is non-unitary. So here we know what is unitarity, but you don't need to work only with unitary modules. You can take any value of the critical mass parameter. Okay, so now I don't have the time to explain the second part, but okay, no, that's not a problem. Just to say that at this level, I describe only the local degrees of freedom. But you may want to represent these degrees of freedom and in terms of potential gauge fields, one forms like Yang-Mills.
So there is no gauge symmetry at this
Exactly.
level.
All these equations that I wrote for you were fully gauge invariant. Really like equation that says that trace of the linearized Riemann tensor is 0. The linearized Riemann tensor is gauge invariant for linearized diffeomorphism. And so only the linearized Weil tensor carries the degrees of freedom, that's the graviton. And then all the degrees of freedom are given by covariant derivative of the Weil tensor that are non-zero on shell. But indeed, so all these equations are gauge invariant. But now you may want to, what we call glue in terms of field theory language, is to glue unitarizable infinite dimensional module to some finite dimensional and obviously non-unitarizable module of the same isometry algebra. So you want to make contact with description of your field equation in terms of a potential. And the potential that will be described in terms of one form, typically like in Maxwell, Chern-Simons, whatever. And then there are several ways to do that. And I don't have the time to explain that, but here I present 3 different ways to describe the same content in terms of degrees of freedom, in terms of various potentials. Okay, one will be that the first field, the first zero form that we have in this tower of zero form, corresponds to the traceless part of the Franz-Dahl tensor, for the Franz-Dahl tensor like that. And okay, another way is to describe the system in terms of the dual, the Hodge dual of the Witt-Friedman curvature for the spin S Franz-Dahl field. And that would give a field equation in terms of the potential, which have different order in terms of derivatives. But nevertheless, if you look at the physical degrees of freedom, they all describe the same degrees of freedom, just different formulation of the same degrees of freedom. And there's another way that we have done that sort of more recently, where this tensor can be viewed as a 3D spin S Cotton tensor for a gauge potential phi mu S. So now this field equation will have gauge symmetry. Here, this field would have a linearized diffeomorphism for spin F, generalized diffeomorphism for spin S, plus linearized Weyl symmetry. Here, in this formulation, you would only have the Franz-Dahl gauge symmetries. But again, this you can control quite well. So here I cannot, I think it's better to stop here instead of starting to describe how to glue one form set of fields. But that's really the general philosophy, is that to one, you need to, it can be unitary or not, but irreducible representation of the ADS3 isometry algebra. If you have propagating fields, and we are interested in propagating fields, then you know that this module there is infinite dimensional, and if you want to represent it in a manifestly Lorentz covariant way, you have an infinite set of zero forms, which are this AN, n going from S plus 1 up to infinity. But then you can glue this set of fields to obviously non-unitary irreducible representation of the same isometry algebra, which will be given in terms of a set of potentials. Like for example, for spin 2, we have the I and the spin connection, B. If you think of spin 2, or topologically massive spin 2, or new massive spin 2, you would have this set of field that will be glued in a precise way, and again, it's Cartan integrability that dictates the way it has to be glued. So then you have a set of, at the group theoretical level, you have a finite dimensional module, which is glued to an infinite dimensional module, like that. So here there is something that does the job, of course, as a group theoretical interpretation. So here you would find your spin connection, and let's say if you describe all these degrees of freedom as a representation of S2, it's a finite dimensional module. Here you have 3 one-forms, and then you also have 3 one-forms in 3 dimensions. So you have 6 states there that are glued to this tower of infinitely many zero forms. And okay, I stop here. Okay, I stop there.
Are there any quick questions?
Oui,
In the case where mu is non-diagonalizable, you mentioned critical massive rarities. Are you referring to those TMGs and FGs at the critical point?
Exactly. Exactly, yes. So obviously they are non-unitary. Yes. So indeed, so there are those generalizations, and that we found just by doing a systematic classification of the field equations for bosonic fields in ADS3. And then we found things that were not existing yet, like this log equations of higher orders. Okay, I don't remember, but things that were not on the market yet, that just we found. But again, we don't know whether they are interesting in some holographic context. I don't know.
I have maybe a question. You said that there is no known generalization to spin larger than 2 of this TMG
no consistent
Non-linear.
generalism that I know.
Non-linear.
That I know.
Because I thought that there were some proposals where they use the ATS formula, so this difference of these two Chern-Simons.
Yes.
And
Indeed.
that can be directly generalized. Are you saying
That's
that they're
right.
not consistent?
But they are
or
inconsistent indeed. So
Yeah.
they are flows. So
They are
that
flows.
we describe in the paper, in one of the first papers we describe in this paper with Ergin and Mitya, Ergin and Per. We make contact with these formulations.
Okay.
We describe them.
Okay, so
Yeah.
there are issues.
Yes, there are issues.
Okay.
Mm,
Okay, so this idea of converting Chern-Simons doesn't always.
no.
Okay, let's thank. And I guess let's take a 1-minute break while the speaker